2017. I'm sitting out behind my fire station next to the pull-up bars. And the reason why, there's a guy a couple years younger than me that could do more pull-ups than me, and I wanted to beat him. So I was doing extra pull-ups. Anyway, I'm sitting behind the station by the pull-up bars, getting some extra sets in, and I sit down on this stump of oak. And while I was kind of waiting, I pulled out a piece of paper. And on the top of that paper was written how we learned from the Yarnell Hill Fire. And it was underlined. And other than that, the page was blank. And I'd been racking my brains trying to figure out what goes on this piece of paper. And I called people all around the country, different agencies, different levels, different backgrounds, and nobody had an answer for me for how the fire service learned from the Yarnell Hill Fire. And this is personal for me. When I started as a wildland firefighter, I was a rookie hotshot on the Los Padres Hotshots. And we were taught that we learn from the past. Bad things happen, we study those bad things, and we learn from them. That's what we do. My superintendent, Stan Stewart, used to tell the guys, he was this, superhuman figure to a rookie. Your soup is like superhuman. He had this silver mustache, and he used to say to us, "You boys think you're bulletproof. I thought that too when I was 23. Well, we're not bulletproof." And so he taught us. He taught us about the mistakes that he made. We did case studies. We studied accident investigations. We visited accident sites. When we had an opportunity to speak to people who had survived some of these historic events, the bosses brought them in so that we could learn from them and listen to them. And the whole point was to learn from the past, to learn and to grow. And I found these presentations so compelling, so moving. But the thing was, for me, sometimes people want to honor the fallen through, there's all kinds of ways to honor the fallen. There are many ways to honor the fallen. But for me, as a young firefighter, what I decided was that my way to honor the fallen, the best memorial that I can build, is the memorial that I build with my actions. As I try to study history, learn from the past, get stronger, smarter for the future. That's the best thing that I can do to honor the past, and that is the best thing that I can do for the guys around me right now, and that is the best thing that I can do for the future. That is the best memorial that we can build. And I took that mindset with me, and I also want to say, that wasn't just something about my crew, something that we did on our crew. This is a major component of firefighter history from the very beginning. One of the most famous wildland fires of the 1900s was the 1910 Big Burn. Dozens of acres burned. Some firefighters lost their lives. And afterwards, the agencies said, wait, we have to learn from this thing. And one of the things that the Forest Service did, they created vast infrastructure. They strung thousands of miles of telephone lines through the wilderness so that they could have better communication, so that they could prevent and fight fires like this in the future. And I just want to say, by the way, that I'm going to give a few more examples of this firefighter tradition of history and learning. And I am going to be kind of focused on the wildland kind of subculture of the American Fire Service, but it's not just wildland. We could talk about the history and tradition of innovation in local and state government fire programs, right? And start with Ben Franklin and go all the way up through the modern era, wing spread. We could talk about Alan Brunacini and Chief Goldfeather, the people that they inspired, and Halligan and the history behind the Halligan and all of that. We could, but today we're focused, that would be a different talk. But the point is, this is not just some wildland phenomenon. This is the history. This is firefighter history. But I'm going to focus on the wildland piece of it. Anyway, so another thing that happened after the 1910 tragedy is one of the firefighters was named Pulaski. And what Pulaski did was he went out after the accident and he took care of some of the guys that were injured, and he tended the graves of some of the fallen because the agencies wouldn't do it. So he did it himself, and he did it in secret because he didn't want it to be this big political thing. And then the other thing that Pulaski did was he worked in his workshop and he created this new tool that we know today as the Pulaski. And so the point is, so I consider Ed Pulaski a triple hero. One is for what he did on the 1910 fires. Two is for how he took care of his guys after the tragedy. And three is the fact that he created this tool that we use to this day, right? That's this example of something bad happens and firefighters find a way to do something good and make things better for the future. That's this history and tradition. If we fast forward to 1937, a group of young men lost their lives on the Blackwater fire. And after that, the lead investigator went out and he drove innovation, a man named Godwin. He drove innovation. It eventually led to the creation of professional fire crews and eventually to the creation of hotshot crews and smoke jumpers. And if you were on a hotshot crew, you may not think that smoke jumpers are that big a deal, but they kind of are. It's true, you know. Anyway, but those innovations came from firefighters looking at the Blackwater and saying, we can do better. We will do better. We're going to get stronger for the future. We're going to get smarter for the future. We're going to get better at what we're doing. That spirit of learning and innovation. After the 1949 Man Gulch fire, firefighters realized that there was something fundamental that they did not understand, and that was extreme fire behavior. So they started studying fire behavior, and that led to the creation of these fire behavior research programs, training programs, and we all are heirs of that to this day. If you've ever taken 190, it's because of those young men that died in 1949 on the Man Gulch fire. We can keep marching through history. After the 1956 Inaha fire was the 1957 task force. The 1957 task force included a group of vets who said, listen, we got all this on-the-job training, we got all this sort of wit and wisdom of wildland fire that you just sort of absorb by working as a firefighter, but what we really need is some kind of structure to our guidelines. And so they created what we today know as the fire orders. Right? Incredible innovation. And anyone who's ever set foot on a wildland fire can tell you that they owe their life in a way to the fire orders. Right? So that group of firefighters in the 50s saw something bad, they did something good that affects us and benefits us to this day. Fast forwarding, after the 1970 debacle in Southern California, there was this, or actually in the state of California, this series of fires called, I like to call it the California Fire Siege, but it was this fiasco. It was a cluster of fiascos, right? And afterwards, firefighters said, this is not all right. I mean, you had people, you know, one engine's going to one fire, and then they're seeing on the freeway the other engine from the place where they're headed going to the place where they just, chaos, right? Firefighters got together from Southern California, and they said, we have to improve. We have to figure out how to work together better. And they created the Incident Command System. 1994. So much progress had been made. And you know I'm giving highlights, right? There's so many great things that we haven't touched on. So much progress had been made. By 1994, it seemed like most of the old problems had been addressed. And then a tragedy happened on Storm King Mountain, and a group of firefighters lost their lives. And the fire service looked at that and said, we have to do better. There's something we don't understand. And so then there was this revolution of saying, wait a minute, we've looked at fire behavior, we've looked at tactics, we've looked at guidelines, we've looked at how we organize, we looked at fire equipment and fire communication and radios and all these different things. What we need to look at now is firefighters themselves. How do we operate? How does our situation awareness work? How do we make decisions? How do we work together as teams? How do we succeed and how do we go wrong at a human level? I call that the human factors revolution. And it led to the leadership development movement. It led to accident investigation reform. It led to the risk revolution. It led to learning culture and the learning culture movement in the fire service. This is incredible. These are incredible breakthrough, innovative movements. And they all came out, if you follow the thread, they all came out of a group of firefighters looking at what happened at South Canyon and saying, we can do better, we will do better, and we're gonna find a way. This firefighter history of learning and innovation, what really made this real for me was not just these big historical examples, of like national history. What made it real for me was what I saw in my crew leaders and in the captains and the superintendent that I worked for. They were the ones that modeled this idea of operational learning, of learning from the past, getting stronger and smarter for the future. And I carried that with me. And I carried that with me as a young firefighter. I carried that with me as I progressed and started developing some of my own innovations. And I was honored to receive the Paul Gleason Lead by Example Award for Innovation as a young firefighter. Because of that innovation, but I carried these values with me and then eventually got involved in accident investigations and trying to reform accident investigations all the way up to when I was asked to serve as lead investigator on the Yarnell Hill Fire. So 2013, I remember the night, I'm sitting in my hotel room, so I'm looking out into the distance thinking, what the heck did I just sign up for? And I made this decision, and what it was, I resolved that I will do my utmost in this investigation to learn from this and to make it so that other firefighters can learn from this. This is the accident of our time. And just as every generation before us learned from their accidents and passed something down generation after generation after generation that came down to me, in the same way, I'm gonna do my part here for the future, for my generation and for the future of the fire service. And I just have this one little part to play as lead investigator. We'll get the job done, we'll fade off into the sunset, and the fire service will do what it always does, which is to learn and grow and innovate, because that's our history. So during the investigation, I did the best I could. I gave the best I could at that time. And I fulfilled the promise that I made. But what I realized 4 years later was that I needed to renew that promise, to make a new promise. Again, I'm gonna do my best to find a way to learn from this thing. And I don't know what that's gonna look like, but it was a life-changing decision. And so I applied for leave of absence and ended up actually leaving my agency to focus on this full-time. Traveled back to the accident site. And I remember going there and looking around and going, okay, what can we do with this? How can we learn from this? How can we do something meaningful for the future? And well, I came up with all kinds of things. And if you're interested in some of those details, I just started something called the American Fire Saga blog. And it's about the saga of the American Fire Service. It's about my own kind of saga of exploration. It's about this accident. It's about other accidents in history. And so I just want to invite you that those posts are there for you. I hope they inspire you. I hope you find some things there that you can use and apply. So I want to let you know that that is a resource that's available for you, is to go check out the American Fire Saga blog. But what I wanted to talk about today, what I wanted to share with you, is that as I was struggling to come up with these practical lessons that firefighters could use and apply, I was traveling around, I was doing different training stuff, different places. And one firefighter that I really respected, he was retired, and he said, well, Brad, I appreciate what you're doing. This is good stuff, He was a manager. He started with a compliment. This is good stuff. And he said, but I think you need to think about the big picture. And that is not a criticism that I get a lot, but that's what he said, think about the big picture. And I said, well, what do you mean think about the big picture? And he said, well, Brad, it's good that you are trying to find lessons to learn from this event. But the American Fire Service is full of innovative, creative people. And maybe your job, yes, keep going with the lessons that you're trying to develop and discover, absolutely. But I think you have a broader mission, and your broader mission is to figure out how you can inspire other innovators. I thought, wow. What if that's what could come out of this tragedy? Not just that we learn lessons to improve ourselves and our crew, but what if part of what we can do is actually get better at learning and innovation? That's incredible. So I went back and I started studying this history, and I tried to learn and analyze and think about, well, what even is this history of learning and innovation? Where does it come from? How does it happen? You know, I casually said earlier, you know, the fire service learns, the fire service innovates. What the heck does that mean, right? And so I'd like to share a few of the key principles, you might call them common denominators, of firefighter learning and innovation that I saw in our history. The first thing is, I think this is the first and most important truth, is that we have a history and tradition of innovation. And this is so important. This is an essential part of firefighter culture. We see something bad, we learn something good, right? There are some folks out there who tend to be traditionalists and say we should hang on to our tradition. I respect tradition, and part of our tradition is to continually adapt and grow. If you want to be a traditionalist, you have to innovate. You have to support innovation, because that's the tradition. And on the other hand, there are some who say, well, we want change and they disrespect tradition. They disrespect history. Well, they're wrong too. The best innovators in our history, and there may be some examples, but they may be exceptions, but you won't find too many exceptions. Our innovators embrace firefighter history. They embrace history, and they see themselves as building on it and contributing to it. It's not a rejection of history, and it's not a tradition above all else. It's embracing a tradition of learning and innovation, and then doing our thing at our time. That's how innovators think. That's the first key point, is that there is this firefighter tradition and history of learning and innovation. The second thing is, as I mentioned, I talked about, I gave you these examples of learning and innovation kind of at a big national level, you know, major events, but it's not just that. It also happens in these, what may not ever make it into a newspaper, right? The learning and innovation and the leadership that I saw from my leaders, from my bosses, from the captains I worked for, that's also part of this firefighter tradition of learning and innovation. And all around this country, there are firefighters tinkering in workshops, doing a little research on some side project, you know, building training, improving training, trying to find some way. That tinkering, that is part of the DNA. That is part of firefighter DNA. It is inherent to the history and the identity of firefighters. So that's the second thing, is that when we're talking about firefighter innovation, we are not talking about something kind of grand and intangible. Sometimes it is really, really a big deal, but it's not only that. It's also something that's happening in every station in this country, in every canyon where there's firefighters right now. Number 3, these innovations, you know, I tend to think of innovation as something that agencies do, or that a profession does, or that you think of it as something that comes from a committee or from an office, right? But the truth is, when you look at the history of firefighter innovation, consistently, it's an individual rolling up his sleeves, just like Ed Pulaski, all the way through history, just like Chief Brunacini. It's firefighters seeing a problem and deciding they're going to find a way to do something about it. Agencies are important. We need agencies, but agencies don't innovate. Firefighters innovate. This is a key truth of firefighter innovation. Another kind of common denominator is that firefighters innovate when they realize no one else is coming to solve this problem. When you realize no one's coming, if something's going to happen here, I got to find a way. That's when innovation happens. That's when problem solving happens. One investigation I did, there's this group of firefighters in canoes. It was in Minnesota, and the fire was doing crazy stuff that it had not done in that area for like 150 years. And this group of 4 firefighters is standing on one side of this little strip of land, one side of the portage. They're going, what the heck are we going to do? And they didn't know this, but they were in a spot where they didn't get radio. They didn't have radio coverage. And so they weren't getting messages from others telling them, giving them updates on what the fire was doing. And so they're standing there, these 4 firefighters, trying to figure out, what are we going to do? And there's this roar in the distance that can't really be the fire, but it is the fire. But they're thinking that can't be the fire. And they're waiting for somebody to give them the clue, the tip off of what the heck is going on, what they're supposed to do, and where are they going to go. And they make this decision. We got to do something. Nobody's coming. We're not getting any more information. We're not getting any more updates. We have to move, and we got to find a way. And so they make this decision that ends up saving their lives. I believe it ends up saving their lives. But that moment, that moment of problem solving happened when they realized it's up to us to figure something out. The next big insight that was really profound for me and really inspiring and very touching, and that I want to share with you, is that when firefighters solve firefighter problems, it helps people that you never would have dreamed of. So I mentioned the incident command system. And remember, this was this thing that firefighters did because they had a mess on their hands. It was embarrassing. There were all these problems, failures, and all of this, right? Firefighters said, we got to do something better. So they create the incident command system, right? Started getting rolled out in the mid-70s, right? Group of fire, we got to do something, right? Well, after the Exxon Valdez disaster and kind of cleanup problems, the Coast Guard said, we got this problem, which is we're trying to coordinate these different efforts and it's not going how we want. What are we going to do? And you know what they did? They looked at ICS and they looked at what firefighters did and they said, we're going to start using ICS. After an earthquake in Mexico, devastating earthquake in Mexico, and the State Department sent people down to try to help, try to do some kind of disaster relief. It didn't go real well. It was a mess. It was embarrassing. All of this. They said, what are we going to do? They looked at ICS, and they adopted ICS for their disaster relief efforts. And all across the country, different agencies, different first responders, fire departments, firefighters started adopting the incident command system to help deal with complex situations. And then after 9/11, it became a national standard. So this is an example now. When first responders in our country, when we send disaster relief overseas, right? When Deepwater Horizon happened, right? People are using the incident command system to make things better. This is incredible. This is the result of a group of firefighters in Southern California going, we got a mess here and we got to make something better. And their innovation, their creativity, their drive and determination, think of the effects that's had around the world. Think of the ducks in the Gulf of Mexico after Deepwater Horizon that are better off today because of those firefighters decades earlier. So this is a key concept. This is a really big deal, is that when firefighters innovate, they don't just solve firefighter problems. They do things that make the world better in ways that you couldn't have predicted. You couldn't have guessed or dreamt that it would work out that way. And this is incredible. And it makes me wonder, and this brings me back to that moment, looking at that blank page about how do we learn from the Yarnell Hill Fire, that the fact that as a profession, we have not yet started to learn from this. And I want to acknowledge something. There are people that have done a lot to try to help, to be positive, to do good after this tragedy. And they deserve all the credit in the world, and I don't in any way want to miss the opportunity to recognize that there are people that have made heroic efforts. But what we need to say, what we need to be honest about, what we need to face is that as a profession, we have not yet started to learn from this tragedy. Not like we have in history. This event was unprecedented. Unprecedented in its severity. It's unprecedented in the mystery surrounding the actual facts of the event. And it's unprecedented in the lack of learning that has come out of it. And I just wonder what we have missed out on and what the world has missed out on by the fact that we have not yet begun to learn from this tragedy. So this turned into kind of this saga of exploring our history and exploring how innovation even happens. And I want to leave you with this thought. I said earlier that I believe the best memorial, the most meaningful memorial that we can build is the one we build with our actions, learning lessons from the past, getting stronger and smarter for the future. But maybe the ultimate way to honor the past is not just by learning lessons from it, but by actually getting better at learning and innovation. What if that's what can come out of this tragedy of our time? That would be incredible.